That's something my grandson will never unmoddered. There are moments in your life that act like a fault line, a clean break between the world you knew and the one you're about to be forced into. For me, that moment came at the age of 80, under the flickering fluorescent lights of a Greyhound bus station. The air smelled of disinfectant and despair, a combination I'd soon come to know intimately. My son David placed a worn nylon suitcase next to the hard plastic chair where I sat. It wasn't even my suitcase. It was one of his old ones from college, smelling faintly of mothballs from his garage. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He just stared at a point somewhere over my left shoulder, his jaw tight. His wife, Cynthia, stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, her expression a careful mixture of impatience and pity. It was a look I'd seen 1,000 times, usually right before they asked me for money. This time, however, they weren't asking for anything. They were giving. David finally cleared his throat and slid a thin paper ticket onto my lap. It was a one-way fare to a place called Port Blossom. I'd never heard of it. I picked it up, my old wrinkled fingers tracing the unfamiliar letters. Port Blossom. It sounded like a place on a postcard, not a final destination. He said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth it once held when he was a boy. Dad, we can't handle this anymore. The house is too small. The kids are a handful, and with your needs it's just not working. Cynthia found a great place for you. It's a nice town, quiet. You'll be fine. He said your needs like it was a terminal disease. My needs. I needed a hand getting out of a low chair sometimes. I needed my food cut into smaller pieces because my dentures didn't fit as well as they used to. I needed someone to repeat themselves now and then because my hearing wasn't what it once was. These were the needs that had become an unbearable burden. I looked from him to Cynthia. She gave a tight, thin-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's for the best, Thomas, she cooed, using my first name as she always did, as if I were a distant, slightly inconvenient relative, and not the man who had walked her down the aisle when her own father refused to. This will give you a chance to be more independent. Independent. I was being exiled with a bus ticket paid for, with my own pension money, and a suitcase full of clothes they deemed unimportant enough to leave behind. My world didn't just feel like it had ended. I felt like I had been erased from it. David gave my shoulder a quick, awkward squeeze. The bus leaves in an hour. Be good, Dad. And with that, they turned and walked away. They didn't look back. Not once. I watched them go, my son's back getting smaller and smaller, until he and his wife disappeared through the sliding glass doors, back into the life they had decided I was no longer a part of. I just sat there. The ticket felt heavy in my hand, like a stone. The sounds of the station, the garbled announcements over the intercom, the rumble of arriving buses, the crying of a tired baby, all faded into a dull roar in my ears. My chest felt hollow, scooped out. 80 years. I had lived for 80 years. I had fought in a war my son only read about in history books. I had loved a woman, my Eleanor, with a fierceness that still ached in my bones. I had built a life, raised a child, buried a wife, and it had all come down to this: a plastic chair in a bus station, and a one-way ticket to nowhere. It wasn't about revenge then. Not at that moment. At that moment, it was about the crushing absolute silence of being utterly alone. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and shameful. I hadn't cried since Eleanor's funeral, and I quickly wiped it away with the back of my hand, hoping no one had seen. But someone had. I must have sat there for a long time, maybe 1 hour, maybe 3. The bus to Port Blossom came and went. I didn't move. I was a statue of an old man, a monument to obsolescence. My world had shrunk to the 4 square feet of linoleum around my chair. Each time the automatic doors hissed open, a small, stupid part of me hoped it would be David, his face filled with regret, coming to take me home. But he never came. The hope dwindled, then died, leaving a cold, hard knot of reality in its place. This was it. This was the end of the line. The human mind is a funny thing. When faced with a trauma, it can't process, it retreats. It runs back to a time when things made sense. My mind ran back to Eleanor. I could see her so clearly, standing in the kitchen of our first home, humming to the radio, a dusting of flour on her cheek. I remembered the day David was born. I'd held him in my arms, this tiny perfect creature, and I'd looked at Eleanor, her face tired but radiant, and I'd made a silent promise to them both. I will always protect you. I will always provide. I will always be there. I'd kept that promise. Even after Eleanor was gone, I kept it. For David, he was all I had left of her. I saw his mother's eyes in his face, her easy laugh in his smile, and so I excused things. I forgave things. When he married Cynthia, I saw how her ambition began to curdle his kindness, but I told myself he was a grown man making his own choices. I was just his dad. My job was to support him. The support started small, a loan to help with the down payment on their first house, a few $100s here and there to cover an unexpected car repair, or a credit card bill they'd let get out of hand. Just until my next commission check, Dad. David would always say, the commission check story was a good one. It was always just around the corner, a shimmering promise of prosperity that never quite arrived. After Eleanor passed, the requests became more frequent, more brazen. They convinced me to sell our family home, the one I'd built with my own 2 hands, the one where every corner held a memory of my wife. It's too much for you to keep up with, Dad, David had said, his voice slick with manufactured concern. And think of the equity. You could invest it, live comfortably. We'll find you a nice small apartment. The nice small apartment turned out to be the spare bedroom in their house, the one with the window that looked out onto the neighbor's trash cans. The equity from my house, all $600,000 of it, went into a joint investment account that David would manage for me. I saw statements occasionally, but I never saw a penny of the principal. It was always tied up in some long-term growth fund that was too complicated for me to understand. Whenever I needed anything, I had to ask like a child, asking for an allowance. They took my car keys next. Your reflexes aren't what they used to be, Dad, Cynthia said, her voice dripping with condescension. It's for your own safety. We'll drive you wherever you need to go. Their generosity lasted about a month. Soon my requests for a trip to the library or to visit an old friend were met with sighs and excuses. My world got smaller and smaller until it was just their house, their rules, their timetable. I was a prisoner in a home I had paid for. I endured it because of that promise to Eleanor. I endured it because David was my son, and you don't give up on your son, do you? You tell yourself it's a phase. You tell yourself they're under stress. You make excuses for them, because the alternative, admitting that your own child sees you as nothing more than a talking ATM and a live-in burden, is too painful to bear. The final straw, the event that led to the Greyhound station, was my 81st birthday. They forgot, not just a simple oversight. They actively planned a weekend trip to a wine-tasting festival with their friends on that exact weekend. When I gently reminded them, Cynthia had rolled her eyes. "Oh, Thomas, don't be so dramatic. We'll celebrate when we get back." They didn't celebrate when they got back. A week later, when I brought it up again, David snapped at me. "For God's sake, Dad, what do you want, a parade? We're busy. We have lives." That was the moment the veil lifted. I saw them not as my struggling son and his ambitious wife, but as 2 people who resented my very existence. The love I felt for my son was a one-way street. I had spent years pouring everything I had, my money, my time, my devotion, into a bottomless pit of entitlement. And for what? To be dumped at a bus station because I was an inconvenience. It was this thought, this cold, hard diamond of truth, that was turning in my mind when a gentle voice broke through the fog. "Sir, are you okay?" I looked up. A young woman in a security guard's uniform was standing in front of me. She had dark, kind eyes and a name tag that read Maria. She couldn't have been more than 25. I must have looked a sight, an old man staring into nothing, my face probably streaked with dried tears. I tried to compose myself, to wave her away with a simple, "I'm fine, thank you," but the words caught in my throat. My carefully constructed dam of composure, which had held for decades, finally broke. A sob escaped me, a ragged, ugly sound that embarrassed me to my core. Maria didn't flinch. She didn't look away or call for a supervisor. She pulled up an empty chair and sat next to me. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just sat there, a quiet, solid presence in the middle of my world collapsing. Then she said, softly, "It's cold in here. Can I get you a cup of coffee?" I just nodded, unable to speak. She disappeared for a few minutes, and came back with 2 steaming styrofoam cups. She handed one to me. The warmth seeped into my cold hands, a small, simple comfort that felt monumental. We sat in silence, sipping our coffee. The coffee was terrible, bitter and burnt, but it was the kindest gesture I had received in years. "My name is Maria," she said. "Thomas," I managed to croak out. "It's nice to meet you, Thomas. Are you waiting for someone?" And the story just came pouring out of me, the whole sorry tale. The house, the money, the forgotten birthday, the bus ticket. I told a complete stranger things I had never admitted even to myself. I wasn't looking for pity. I think I was just trying to say it all out loud to see if it was real. Maria listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. She just listened, her dark eyes filled with a deep, unwavering empathy that felt like a lifeline. When I was done, my voice hoarse, the station was quieter. The evening rush had subsided. Maria looked at the ticket still clutched in my hand. "You're not going to Port Blossom, are you, Thomas?" she asked. It wasn't really a question. "I have nowhere else to go," I said, the words tasting like ash. She shook her head. "Everyone has somewhere else to go. You just haven't found it yet." She stood up. "My shift is over in 10 minutes. There's a motel just a couple of blocks from here. It's not the Ritz, but it's clean and it's safe. Let me help you get a room for the night. You need to get out of this place. You need a real bed." I started to protest. I couldn't let her do that. I reached for my wallet, but she gently pushed my hand down. "Don't you worry about it," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Think of it as a loan from a friend. You can pay me back someday." She helped me to my feet, my old knees protesting. She picked up the cheap suitcase, and we walked out of the Greyhound station together. The night air was cool and crisp against my hot face. As we walked the 2 blocks to the Starlight Motel, its neon sign flickering weakly, I felt something shift inside me. The despair, the crushing weight of my son's betrayal, was still there, but it was no longer the only thing. Beside it, a tiny hard ember of something else had begun to glow. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was anger, a cold, quiet, calculating anger. Maria got me checked in, paying for the room with her own debit card. She made sure I had the key, and that I knew how to work the lock. She wrote her phone number on a piece of motel stationery. "If you need anything, Thomas, anything at all, you call me." She was about to leave when I stopped her. "Maria," I said, my voice stronger than it had been all day. Why would you do all this for a stranger?" She looked at me, a sad little smile on her face. "My grandfather," she said, "he was a good man, worked hard his whole life. When he got old, my uncle made some bad choices. My grandpa ended up alone. I was too young to help him then. I guess I'm just trying to pay back a debt I can never repay." She squeezed my arm gently. "Get some rest, Thomas." I watched her walk away, her back straight and proud. I closed the door to my motel room. The room was small, and smelled of stale cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner. The bedspread was a hideous shade of orange, but it was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. It was a sanctuary. It was a command center. My son thought he had ended my life. He was wrong. He had just given me a new one. The grief was still there, a heavy cloak around my shoulders, but now it was mingled with resolve. It wasn't about revenge for what they did to me, not entirely. It was about justice. It was about proving that I was not a piece of furniture to be discarded. I was Thomas Abernathy, and my son had no idea who he was dealing with. I sat down on the lumpy bed. I took a deep breath. For 50 years, I had lived a quiet life. For 50 years, I had been the silent partner, the man behind the curtain. David and Cynthia saw me as a frail, dependent old man, with a modest pension. They had no idea about the Abernathy-Ross commercial real estate empire. They had no idea that my old army buddy Frank Ross and I had built a dynasty from scratch, and that my silent 50% stake was managed by one of the most respected wealth management firms in the country. They saw a liability. They were about to meet the asset. I pulled out my wallet and found the card I hadn't used in years. It was a simple, elegant black card with a single name and number. Arthur Vance, my wealth manager, my financial pitbull, my friend for 30 years. I picked up the motel room phone, the plastic greasy to the touch. The first call I made was to him. The second request I made of him was to find out everything he could about a young security guard named Maria. I wanted to know her biggest dream, because after I was done dismantling the life my son had built on a foundation of my money and his own cruelty, I was going to make Maria's dream come true. It was no longer about what my family had taken from me. It was about what I was going to give to someone who deserved it. My world hadn't ended at that bus station. It had just been rebooted. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, calm voice answered. Arthur Vance. Arthur, I said, my own voice sounding strange and gravelly to my ears. It's Thomas Abernathy. There was a moment of shocked silence on the other end of the line. Arthur was used to me being predictable. We had our quarterly calls, as regular as the seasons. I never called him out of the blue, and certainly not at 9 o'clock at night on a Tuesday. Thomas, my God, is everything all right? You sound, he trailed off, too polite to say, like you've been run over by a truck. I've been better, Arthur, I said, a dry, humorless chuckle escaping my lips. But I'm about to get a whole lot better. And then I told him everything. I started with the bus station and worked my way backward through the years of quiet financial bleeds, the emotional blackmail, the slow, methodical isolation. I left nothing out. I painted the whole ugly picture, not for his pity, but for his understanding. I needed him to know the context. I needed him to understand the stakes. Arthur listened without interruption, the way a good lawyer or a good doctor listens. He just made small affirming sounds, letting me know he was there. When I finally finished, the silence on the line was heavy. I could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant financial mind. Thomas, he said finally, his voice no longer just calm, but infused with a cold fury I recognized well. It was the same tone he used when a business deal was going south, and he was about to go on the offensive. First things first, where are you? I'm sending a car. No, I said firmly, not yet. For now I'm a ghost. I'm staying at the Starlight Motel, off I-95, and I'm paying cash. I don't want any paper trail leading back to me just yet. We are going to do this my way, quietly. Understood, he said, the respect in his voice a balm on my wounded pride. Silent mode engaged. So, what is the first move, General? I almost smiled. Frank used to call me that in our early days. He was the frontline soldier, the charismatic deal-maker. I was the general in the tent, planning the campaign, managing the logistics, seeing the whole battlefield while he was fighting on it. First, I said, I want you to tell me about my son. I want a full financial workup on David and Cynthia Abernathy. I want to know every credit card, every car loan, every mortgage payment. I want to know where every dollar I loaned them went. I have a feeling they haven't been putting it into a 401k. Consider it done. Arthur said, I have the records of the transfers from your accounts. We can start there. It will be on your secure client portal by morning. Good. Second, and this is just as important, I need you to find someone for me. Her name is Maria. She's a security guard, probably in her mid-20s. She works the evening shift at the downtown Greyhound station. That's all I have. What do you need to know about her, Thomas? Everything, I said, my voice softening. I want to know her story. I want to know what she struggles with. I want to know what she dreams about when she's not helping old fools at bus stations. Find out what her biggest, most impossible dream is, Arthur, and be discreet. I don't want her to know she's being investigated. I want this to be a surprise. I have a private investigator we use for due diligence. She's the best.
A ghost herself. This Maria won't even know she's there. I'll get right on it. Thank you, Arthur. Thomas, he said, his voice serious again. About your own situation. The Starlight Motel is not a long-term solution. Let me arrange something for you. A residential hotel, a furnished penthouse. You own half of the Leverett building downtown. I can have the penthouse suite ready for you by tomorrow afternoon. Top floor, private elevator. The staff there are notoriously discreet.
I thought about it for a moment. The idea of sinking into a real bed, of having a room that didn't smell like sadness, was tempting. But more than that, it was a strategic move. It was about reclaiming my status, not for the sake of luxury, but for the sake of my own mind. It's hard to feel powerful when you're sleeping on a mattress with a spring digging into your back. "All right, Arthur," I said. "Set it up, and arrange for a car and driver. Nothing flashy. A black town car. And I'll need a new wardrobe. Have someone from a decent men's store meet me there. And a new phone. A secure one." "It's already done," he said. "Thomas, it's good to have you back in the game." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of the motel room and let the plan settle in my mind. For the first time in a decade, I felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to my son's needs. The first part of my life was with Eleanor. The second part was a long, lonely epilogue dedicated to David. This was the third act, and I was going to write it myself. The next morning, Arthur's report on David and Cynthia was waiting for me in the encrypted email he set up. I read it on a new tablet delivered to my motel room by a silent courier. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and scrolled through the numbers, and the cold anger in my gut hardened into something like granite. It was worse than I had imagined. They were drowning in debt. 2 mortgages. They'd secretly refinanced the house to pull out more cash. 2 luxury car leases that cost more per month than my entire pension. Credit card debt spread across a dozen cards, totaling over $200,000. They were living a life built on my money and financial quicksand. Every loan I had given them had gone to service this mountain of debt, or to fund a lifestyle of country clubs, designer clothes, and expensive vacations. They weren't just irresponsible, they were pathological. They were living like millionaires on a bank teller's salary, with me as their personal interest-free bank. The most galling part was the investment account David was managing for me. He hadn't invested a dime. He'd put the entire $600,000 from my house sale into a high-risk speculative tech fund run by one of his country club buddies. The fund had collapsed 6 months ago. The money was gone, all of it. He had lost my entire life savings, the nest egg Eleanor and I had so carefully built, and he had never told me. The trip to the bus station wasn't just them getting tired of me. It was a preemptive move. They knew the whole house of cards was about to collapse, and they were getting rid of the primary creditor before he found out. That was the moment it truly became about revenge. The personal betrayal was a deep wound, but the calculated, cold-blooded destruction of my life's work, the legacy I had meant to leave for my grandchildren, that was a declaration of war. It wasn't just about my money anymore. It was about the profound disrespect for me, for Eleanor, for everything we had stood for. A black town car arrived at 11. The driver, a stoic man named George, simply tipped his cap and opened the door for me. He didn't ask any questions. He drove me to a soaring glass tower downtown, a building I recognized from architectural drawings. Le Rêve, the dream. Frank had always had a flair for the dramatic. We drove into a private underground garage, and George led me to a private elevator that whisked us straight to the penthouse. The doors opened into a space that was larger than my entire old house. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city I had helped build, but had never truly seen. The furniture was modern and elegant. The air was cool and clean. On a large mahogany desk sat a new laptop, a new phone, and a folder with my name on it. Waiting for me in the master suite was a tailor from the finest men's store in the city, with racks of clothes in my size. For a few hours, I was just an old man being fitted for new suits, shirts, and shoes. The tailor was a professional, an artist. As he worked pinning and measuring, I started to feel myself change. With each layer of old, worn-out clothing I shed a layer of the victim I had become. The man looking back at me from the full-length mirror was no longer the discarded father from the bus station. He was taller, straighter. He was Thomas Abernathy. Later that afternoon, Arthur called. "The investigator's initial report on Maria is in," he said. "It's quite a story." He told me what his researcher, a woman named Miss Evans, had uncovered. Maria was 26 years old. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 19, leaving her as the sole guardian of her then 14-year-old brother, Leo. She had dropped out of community college, where she was studying business management, to work. She had been working 2 jobs ever since, the security gig at night, and as a waitress at a diner during the day. Every spare penny she made went to Leo. He was a good kid, smart with his hands, and was currently enrolled in a top-tier automotive technology program. He was her whole world. "And her dream?" I asked, my voice thick. "That's the interesting part," Arthur said. "According to Miss Evans, who had a chance encounter with her at the diner, Maria talks about it all the time. She wants to open a small cafe, not a fancy one. She calls it the Haven, a place with comfortable chairs, free Wi-Fi, and good cheap coffee, a place where students can study, old people can read the paper, and nobody ever feels rushed or alone. A safe harbor. Her grandfather used to take her to a place like that when she was a little girl. A safe harbor." My throat tightened. This young woman, who had faced so much loss and hardship, whose greatest dream was simply to create a place of kindness for others. She was the antithesis of my son and his wife. They took, and she gave. "Arthur," I said, my decision made, "I want you to use the Ross Abernathy commercial division. Find the perfect location for a cafe, a corner spot with lots of natural light. Buy it. I don't care what it costs. Then set up a blind trust. The beneficiary will be Maria. Fund it with enough capital to cover a full build-out, equipment, licensing and operating expenses for the first 2 years. I want her to have a real chance at this, with no financial pressure." "Consider it done, Thomas," he replied. "And what about David and Cynthia?" I looked out the window at the city sprawling below me. All those buildings, all those businesses, all built on rules, on contracts, on consequences. My son had broken the most fundamental contract of all. "Oh, them," I said, a chill in my voice that surprised even me. "I haven't forgotten about them. It's time to make our first move. I want you to draw up a formal demand letter from the firm's legal department. I want you to itemize every single dollar I transferred to them over the past 10 years. We'll call them what they were. Loans, and we're calling them due, in full, payable in 30 days. Send it via certified mail. I want them to have to sign for it. That's over $1 million, Thomas," Arthur said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "They'll never be able to pay it." "I know," I said, watching the tiny cars moving far below. "That's not the point. The point is the letter. The point is the signature. The point is the moment they realize the Bank of Dad is officially closed, and the collection agency has just opened for business." The first sign that the message had been received came 3 days later. It was a phone call to the new secure cell phone Arthur had provided. The caller ID showed David's name. I let it ring 4 times, then answered. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "Dad?" His voice was tight, confused. "Dad, are you there? I've been trying to call your old phone. We've been worried sick." Worried sick. The lie was so blatant, so reflexive, it was almost impressive. "I'm here, David," I said, my voice calm and even. "Where are you? What's going on? We got this letter, from some law firm. It's insane. It's some kind of horrible mistake. It says we owe you over $1 million. It's threatening to put a lien on our house." I could hear the rising panic in his voice, the frantic edge of a man whose carefully constructed reality was cracking at the seams. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about his house, his cars, his country club membership. "It's not a mistake, David," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. What are you talking about? Dad, that was gift money. For the house, for the kids' school. You were helping us out. You can't just... His voice sputtered, a mixture of indignation and fear. I have meticulous records of every transfer, David, I said, the words as cold and hard as pebbles. Each one was documented at the time as a personal loan. A loan, by definition, is meant to be repaid. The term of the loan is now over. Payment is due. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could practically hear him trying to process this new reality. The doddering, compliant old man he had exiled was suddenly speaking the language of lawyers and ledgers. But we don't have it, he finally stammered. You know we don't have that kind of money. You'd ruin us. You'd leave your own grandchildren homeless. Ah, there it was, the final desperate play. The grandchildren, the human shields he and Cynthia always deployed when they were cornered. It used to work. It used to twist my heart with guilt. But the man whose heart could be twisted by that particular threat had been left behind at the Greyhound station. That's a shame, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion at all. You have 30 days to figure it out. I suggest you speak to your lawyer. Dad, please, he begged, the false bravado gone, replaced by raw desperation. Just talk to me. Where are you? Let me come see you. We can sort this out. There is nothing to sort out, I said. The terms are in the letter. And then I hung up. I ended the call and blocked his number. I stared at the phone for a long moment. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a rush of vengeful satisfaction, but I didn't. I just felt a profound, weary sadness. He still didn't get it. He didn't understand that this wasn't about the money. He thought it was a negotiation. He had no idea that it was a demolition. The next call, 2 days later, came from Cynthia. She didn't bother with the pretense of being worried. Her voice was pure venom. You selfish old man, she hissed into the phone. I had let the call go to voicemail, and I listened to it on speaker, a glass of water in my hand, looking out at the city lights. After everything we did for you, we took you into our home. We fed you, and this is how you repay us, by trying to destroy your own family. David is a wreck. Do you know what this is doing to him, to your grandchildren? Her voice cracked on the word grandchildren, a calculated theatrical break. It was a performance, and a bad one at that. You think you have some kind of power now, don't you? She continued, her voice rising to a shrill pitch, hiding away somewhere, sending your fancy lawyers after us. But you're nothing, Thomas. You're just a bitter, lonely old man. You'll die alone, and we'll be the ones to laugh last. You'll see. The voicemail ended. I deleted it without a second thought. She was wrong. I wasn't lonely. In my quiet, sterile penthouse, I had the company of my own resolve. I had Arthur, a loyal ally, and I had the thought of Maria, a young woman whose dream of a small cafe felt more real and important than Cynthia's entire life of hollow acquisition. Arthur's plan was more comprehensive than just a demand letter. It was a multi-front assault. The letter was the opening salvo, designed to induce panic. The next phase was to quietly cut off their supply lines. On my instruction, Arthur's legal team sent notifications to the various financial institutions they dealt with. The luxury car company was informed that the guarantor of their leases, a corporate entity I owned, was withdrawing its guarantee, citing fraudulent misrepresentation. The country club received a similar letter regarding their membership, which had been secured using a line of credit from a bank where I was a majority shareholder. The fallout was swift and, as Arthur reported, brutal. David's leased German sedan was repossessed from his office parking lot in the middle of the day, in front of all his colleagues. Cynthia's SUV was picked up from the mall parking lot. Her credit card was declined at her favorite boutique. They were being socially and financially dismantled, piece by piece, without me ever having to speak to them again. They tried to fight back, of course. David hired a lawyer, a flashy downtown type, whose letter to my legal team was full of bluster and threats. He called my actions a cruel and unusual form of elder abuse, which was an irony so rich I actually laughed out loud when Arthur read it to me. My lawyers responded with a single devastating package. It contained photocopies of David's signed acknowledgments for the loans, the prospectus for the failed tech fund he had gambled my life savings on, and bank statements showing lavish spending sprees
that occurred days after I had given him money for essentials. David's lawyer quit the case the next day. Their world was shrinking, just as mine once had. Their friends, the ones who had flocked to their summer barbecues and admired their expensive toys, began to distance themselves. People don't like to associate with the stench of financial failure. The private school sent a letter threatening to expel the children if the overdue tuition wasn't paid. The carefully curated image of the successful, happy Abernathy family was crumbling into dust. One evening, my driver, George, brought me to a quiet Italian restaurant. Arthur was waiting for me at a corner table. He had a file with him. "Good evening, Thomas," he said, shaking my hand. "You're looking well. The city life agrees with you." "It's the peace and quiet," I said, "and the lack of emotional blackmail. What have you got for me?" He slid the file across the table. It was the plan for Maria's cafe. There were architectural drawings of a beautiful corner property in a transitioning neighborhood, a place filled with artists' lofts and young families. There were photos of the interior, with big sunny windows. There was a business plan, a budget, a proposed menu. It was called The Haven. It was perfect. "The property is secured," Arthur said. "We close in 2 weeks. The trust is established and funded. Miss Evans, our PI, has done a remarkable job. She's befriended Maria and has subtly been planting the idea of entering a new business competition. The grand prize, of course, will be the cafe. We've arranged it through a philanthropic foundation we control. It will all seem completely legitimate. She'll win, and she'll never know it was rigged in her favor." I looked at the drawings, at the dream of a good person about to be made real. This was the point of it all. This was the opposite of what David and Cynthia had done. They had taken a life's worth of security and turned it into nothing. We were taking a simple dream and turning it into a concrete reality. "Excellent work, Arthur," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine the waiter was pouring. "There is one more thing," he said, his expression turning serious. "David showed up at La Reve this afternoon. He was a mess, ranting in the lobby, demanding to see you. Security handled it, of course, but he knows where you are now. He's getting desperate." "Let him," I said. "Desperate men make mistakes." The exodus of their so-called friends was the first wave. The second was the retreat of their own extended family. Cynthia's parents, who had always lauded David's success, suddenly stopped returning their calls. Once the cars were gone, and the country club membership was revoked. Her sister, who had been a frequent guest at their pool, suddenly had no time for them. It's a hard truth that the families you build on a foundation of status and money are only as strong as your last bank statement. David and Cynthia had surrounded themselves with people who loved what they had, not who they were, and now that they had nothing, they were truly alone. Their desperation escalated in predictable ways. First came the pleading voicemails, then the angry ones, then the ones that sounded like they were weeping. I listened to none of them, deleting them after the first few seconds. Their words had no power over me anymore. They were just noise, the frantic buzzing of insects trapped in a jar. The inevitable next step was a direct confrontation. I knew it was coming. Arthur had warned me that David had been seen several times near the entrance to La Reve, looking haggard and lost. I instructed George, my driver, to use a different exit for a while, but I knew it was only a matter of time. It happened on a Thursday. I was returning from a meeting with the board of a children's hospital foundation I had decided to support. As my town car pulled into the private garage, he was there, waiting. He must have slipped past the outer security gate. He stood in the middle of the driveway, forcing George to stop the car.
He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His face was pale and unshaven, and his eyes were wild. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. George immediately reached for the phone to call security, but I put a hand on his arm. "It's all right, George," I said calmly. "I'll handle this." I stepped out of the car. The air in the concrete garage was cool and still. David just stared at me. He was looking at my new suit, my polished shoes, the quiet confidence in my posture. He was seeing a stranger. The frail, compliant old man he had abandoned was gone, and in his place was this person he didn't know, this man who held all the cards. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking, "we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, David." I said, my voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. Please, he begged, taking a step forward. You have to call them off. The lawyers, the banks. They're going to take the house. Cynthia. The kids, we have nowhere to go. You had a home, I said, my voice remaining level, betraying none of the roiling emotion inside me. You had a beautiful home that I helped you buy, and you had another one, a smaller one, under your own roof. You had me. You decided you didn't want either. It wasn't like that, he cried, his voice rising. We were under so much pressure. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. His apology, when it finally came, was as hollow as a drum. It was the apology of a cornered animal, not a remorseful son. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry there were consequences. He wasn't sorry for what he did. Your sorrow doesn't pay the mortgage, David, I said. I started to walk toward the elevator. He panicked. He lunged forward and grabbed my arm. No, you can't just walk away from me. I'm your son. His grip was surprisingly strong. For a flicker of a second I saw not my 45-year-old son, but a desperate, frightened stranger. George was out of the car in an instant, moving to intervene, but I held up a hand to stop him. I looked down at David's hand on my bespoke suit sleeve. Then I looked back up into his eyes. You forfeited the right to call yourself my son at a Greyhound bus station, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than if I had shouted. Let go of my arm, David. He flinched as if I had struck him. His hand fell away. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight went out of him, replaced by a pathetic, whining despair. What do you want from me? He whimpered. What will it take to make this stop? I paused at the elevator door and looked back at the wreck of a man who was my child. I want nothing from you, I said. That's the point you still don't understand. This isn't a negotiation. It's a foreclosure on our entire relationship. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside without a backward glance, leaving him standing alone in the echoing silence of the garage. As the doors slid shut, I saw him sink to his knees on the cold concrete. I felt a pang, not of pity, but of a deep, sorrowful finality. It was truly over. The final act didn't take place in a garage or over the phone. It took place where all of my most important business had been conducted for the last 50 years, in the main boardroom of Abernethy Ross Commercial Real Estate. It was a room designed to intimidate. A long, dark mahogany table sat under a coffered ceiling. One wall was glass, overlooking the city from the 40th floor. The other walls were lined with architectural models of the skyscrapers, shopping centers, and office parks we had built. It was a monument to legacy, to stability, to power. I had Arthur arrange the meeting. Their new lawyer, a beleaguered-looking public aid type, had been sending desperate letters, begging for a settlement conference. I agreed. I sat at the head of the table. To my right was Arthur, his briefcase full of documents. To my left was a surprise guest, Frank Ross, Jr., the son of my old partner and the current CEO of the company. Frank Sr. had passed a few years back, but his son was every bit as shrewd and fiercely loyal. I had asked him to be there as a silent testament to the power they had so foolishly underestimated. David and Cynthia arrived exactly on time. They looked diminished by the grandness of the room. Their clothes were cheap, their faces etched with stress and defeat. They sat at the far end of the table, huddled together with their lawyer, looking like defendants in a trial they had already lost. Their lawyer started to speak, his voice nervous, talking about family reconciliation and amicable solutions. I let him talk for about 5 minutes, then I raised my hand. He fell silent immediately. Thank you, counsel, I said calmly, but we're not here to discuss reconciliation. We're here to sign the surrender. I looked down the long table at my son. David, Cynthia, I'm going to give you the chance to say whatever it is you feel you need to say. I will listen without interruption, and then I will speak. And that will be the last time we ever communicate. Cynthia started to cry, a practiced soft weeping. David cleared his throat. He spoke about their love for me, how they were just overwhelmed, how they never meant for any of this to happen. He talked about the pressures of modern life, the cost of raising children, the desire to give them the best of everything. It was a master class in self-pity and blame-shifting. He never once took full, unadulterated responsibility. It was always someone else's fault, some external pressure that made them do what they did. When he finally ran out of words, a heavy silence filled the room. I let it sit there for a full minute, the only sound the quiet hum of the building's ventilation. Then I began to speak. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use accusatory language. I just stated facts. On May 12th, 10 years ago, I began, looking at a sheet of paper Arthur had prepared. I transferred $40,000 to your account for a down payment on your house. It was documented as a loan. On September 3rd, 9 years ago, $25,000 for a new roof. A loan. For the next decade, I made a total of 117 transfers to your various accounts, totaling $1,242,000. I paused. David and Cynthia stared at me, their faces white. During that same period, I continued, you took 3 trips to Europe, 2 cruises to the Caribbean, and bought 17 designer handbags that cost more than my monthly pension. You sent your children to a private school with a tuition of $30,000 per year, while telling me you couldn't afford to fix the plumbing in my bathroom. I let that sink in. 6 months ago, David, you informed me that the investment fund, where you had placed the entire $600,000 from the sale of my home, had performed modestly. The truth is that the fund had been worthless for over a year. You lost everything, my entire life savings, and you continued to let me believe it was safe. I looked directly at him, and then, with the knowledge that you were financially ruined, and that I would soon discover the truth, you drove me to a bus station. You put a one-way ticket in my hand, and left me there, an 80-year-old man with 1 suitcase and $100 in his pocket. You didn't do it because you couldn't handle me. You did it to get rid of a problem. You did it to silence a creditor. I leaned forward slightly. This was not a mistake. This was a calculated long-term pattern of exploitation, fraud, and ultimately, abandonment. You did not see me as a father. You saw me as a resource to be drained. And when the resource ran dry, you discarded the empty shell. Cynthia was openly sobbing now. David just stared at the table, his face a mask of shame. Arthur slid a single document down the table. This is a settlement agreement, I said. It's very simple. In it I agree to forgive the entirety of your $1.2 million debt. I will release all liens on your property. The lawsuits will be dropped. A flicker of hope appeared in their eyes. Their lawyer leaned forward to grab the paper. In exchange, I continued, and the hope died. You will sign over any and all present and future claims to my estate. You will relinquish any rights of inheritance for yourselves and for your children. You will sign a legally binding document that effectively writes you out of my life and my legacy forever. You will also sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing you from ever speaking about me, my finances, or this meeting to anyone, ever. If you violate it, the debt becomes due again, in full, with penalties. Their lawyer read it, and his jaw dropped. This is draconian, he stammered. It is non-negotiable, I said. You will sign it, or we will proceed with the foreclosure. We will sue you for fraud. We will bankrupt you, and I will own your house. The choice is yours. A clean break, and a chance to start over with nothing, or a fight you cannot possibly win that will leave you with less than nothing. They didn't even need to confer. David picked up the pen with a shaking hand and signed. Cynthia, her tears smudging the ink, did the same. They pushed the paper back across the table. It was done. I stood up. Frank Jr. and Arthur stood with me. I looked at my son one last time. I hope you find your way, David, I said, and I meant it. I hope you learn to be a man your sons can be proud of, but you will do it on your own. As of this moment, we are strangers. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to their new reality. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt free. The weight of their expectations, their disappointments, their endless needs, was finally lifted from my shoulders. The ghost of the promise I had made to Eleanor was finally at peace. I had protected her son from the consequences of his actions for far too long. The most loving thing I could do now was to let him finally face them. A few weeks later, I found myself standing on a sun-drenched street corner. A newly installed sign, painted in cheerful blue letters, swung gently in the breeze. It read, "The Haven Cafe." Through the big sparkling clean windows, I could see a cozy interior. There were comfortable-looking armchairs, small wooden tables, and a long counter where a gleaming espresso machine sat, and behind that counter, wiping it down with a cloth, was Maria. She was laughing, talking to a young man with the same dark eyes, who was busy stocking shelves. Her brother Leo. The new business competition had been a huge success. The local news had even done a story on the deserving young woman who won the grand prize and was finally realizing her dream. Her face in the newspaper photo, a mixture of shock and pure unadulterated joy, was now framed and sitting on my desk at the penthouse. I had debated how to do this. I could have remained an anonymous benefactor, but that felt incomplete. I pushed open the glass door. A small bell chimed. Maria looked up, a welcoming professional smile on her face. "Welcome to the Haven. Can I—" Her voice trailed off as she recognized me. Her smile turned into one of genuine warmth. "Thomas, oh my gosh, look at you. You look like $1,000,000. I feel like it, Maria," I said, walking toward the counter. "The place is beautiful, even better than I imagined." "You imagined?" she asked, a confused little frown on her face. I just smiled. "I'll have a cup of coffee," I said. "The best you've got." As she prepared the coffee, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, I laid a small, simple envelope on the counter. "I believe I owe you for a motel room," I said, "and for a cup of coffee." She laughed. "Thomas, you don't have to do that. Open it," I said gently. She wiped her hands on her apron and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. I had calculated the cost of the motel room and added a generous amount of interest, compounded daily for the last month. But that wasn't the main thing. Underneath it was the deed to the building she was standing in, signed over, free and clear to her. She stared at the documents, her hands trembling. She looked from the paper to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't understand," she whispered. "The foundation, the competition, the foundation is real," I said softly, "and you are the most deserving person I have ever met. But sometimes, decent people need a little help to get a fair shot. Consider it a loan from a friend, paid forward. Your kindness to a stranger at a bus station, it did more than just get me a room for the night. It reminded me that there was still good in the world. It reminded me of who I wanted to be." Tears began to stream down her face, but these were not tears of sadness. She came around the counter and wrapped her arms around me in a hug. I was stiff at first, unused to such open affection, but then I relaxed and hugged her back. "Thank you," she sobbed into my shoulder. "Thank you." "No, Maria," I said, my own eyes stinging. "Thank you. And that's my story. It's a strange thing, family. We're taught that blood is the strongest bond, that it's unconditional. But I've learned that's not always true. Sometimes, the family you choose, the allies you make, the decent people you decide to invest in, is more real and more powerful than the one you're born into. My son and his wife, they thought my value was in my bank account. They were wrong. My true wealth was the ability to recognize decency, to reward kindness, and to build a new life based on respect, not obligation. They say living well is the best revenge. I'm not sure if I agree. I think living with purpose is the best revenge. My purpose is no longer to sustain a family that didn't deserve it. It's to build things, businesses, futures, and safe havens for good people. My son wanted to erase me. Instead, he gave me the freedom to finally write my own ending, and it's a much better story. So that's what happened. Now I have to ask you, what would you have done? Was I right to cut them off completely, or did I go too far? Family is a complicated thing, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found my story compelling, please give this video a like, and consider subscribing to the channel. It lets me know that sharing my experience is worthwhile,
and ensures you won't miss the next chapter. Thank you for listening.